Hi everyone, Nathan here from the Math faculty, and in this video I'm going to demonstrate one possible way in which you can use Microsoft Excel to set up a marking grid for your assessment tasks. And before I dive in, it's probably worth noting what I'm about to show you is not the only way to do this. It's not even necessarily the best way. It's just the way I think about it, and hopefully it gives you some ideas for what you may like to do in your faculty. It's also probably worth noting that whilst I demonstrate this in Excel, my main focus won't be on how to use Excel. I'm going to assume that you know how to make use of Excel and its functionality. So if at any point in this video you see me do something and you don't know how to do that, feel free to ask me, because I can probably point you in the direction of resources that will help you learn how to do those things if you need to. Okay, so with that said, I'll get started. And to begin, we need to set up the structure of what we're doing. And it's probably worth noting for this first bit of the demonstration, I'm going to assume that we have an assessment task that takes in numerical grades. So students answer questions and they get marks for getting those questions right. I'll later in the video show how I might adapt what I do if instead of numerical grades we assign, say, letters against dot points and a rubric. But for now I'll focus on numerical grades because that's what we do in the math faculty. So we'll need to have the students' names. I'm just going to use the generic student 1, and I'll just set this up for 10 students. Naturally, you can set it up for as many students as you need. For each of those students, they'll get a mark as a number. We'll also want to keep track of the percentage, their rank, and then how that mark converts to a worded grade. So the kind of outstanding, high, sound, basic. And so it's probably worth noting, I'll note up here, those grades that we're going to work with. So outstanding, high, sound, basic, and then also limited. I'll work on the formatting towards the end. For now, I'm just going to focus on the structure, which is really the most important part of all this, getting the structure right. Because it's once you have a useful structure, that everything else then kind of just flows naturally. So for each of these grades, we'll have to define a cutoff, and then we'll probably want to be counting how many students fall within each grade. For the marks, we'll want to keep track of how many marks was the assessment out of in total, what was the average mark achieved, and what is that average as a percentage. Now, in math, and maybe in your faculty too, we often will assess more than one syllabus dot point in an assessment. So if that's the case, we will want to keep track of all, basically the mark and the percentage against each of those dot points. So I might just have a thinner column to demarcate, and then we'll take those ideas for what I'll call syllabus dot point A. I mean, it's just generic. And then we'll do the same thing for syllabus dot point. So we'll want the mark and the grade. And then we'll take all that and we'll do it again for syllabus dot point B. So that's kind of just some generic structure. But where the real key to being able to set up the marking grid is what I'm about to create now, which is basically space to enter the mark against each question on the assessment. And so we're going to have here, I'll just say how many marks each question is worth, what syllabus dot point that question relates to, and what I'll call a success rate, which can be a useful thing when analyzing questions. And let's just say, again, to keep this simple and generic, we've just got 10 questions. So there we go, 10. And let's just say the question is worth 1, 1, 1 mark, and then 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, and then the final question is worth 4. Again, you would just define this for your assessment. Let's say the first 5 questions relate to syllabus A, and then the next 5 relate to B. It may not be like that, but we'll set up our formulas so that whatever we type, everything just updates. I'll work on the success rate later. But the key is, for each student and for each question, we will input a grade. And typically with inputs, again, this is not a universal thing, but in the financial modelling world that I came from, it was almost always agreed that inputs would be in the light yellow. And so that way, if there's a cell that's yellow, that means you can change it. But if it's not yellow, then you'd want to think very carefully before making any updates, because who knows whether what you do affects all the formulas that have been created. Now at this point, I might just turn off the grid lines because they create a lot of visual noise, and I'll just put the border around those cells that we want to have our inputs. I might just clean up some of this alignment as well. And basically, it's at this point that we'd enter our grades. And what I'll do is I'll just, maybe I'll start by having a student who gets perfect marks. So this first student will get everything right. Let's just say this last student maybe gets the first question right, and then everything else not so right. And then we'll have everything in between. So maybe, actually, if I take this student and drop that down, and we'll just say they gradually get a bit worse in their performance. And then hopefully this gives us a sufficient spread in terms of the various grades. And I might make that left aligned as well. Now, once we've got our data in, we can start to put in the formulas. So this test, the total marks on this test would be equal to the sum of all of these values. And again, I might just put a border around that calculation. I might just give it a bit of a right alignment as well. Might do the same thing here. Make that right aligned. Probably need to get all of this formatted as well. We'll want that one too. So that can be, this can all just be center aligned, that's probably fine. Maybe move that across a bit. Okay, so the total marks are out of 22 for this hypothetical test. The average marks we'll do later once we've got these in, and same with the percentage, we'll do that later. So for each student, we can, or actually I might as well do the success rate now. So the idea of a success rate is for all the students, what was the average mark achieved for that question? So this can probably actually be center aligned so it all visually lines up. So basically the success rate will be the average mark across all the students divided by what that question was out of. And so you get, in this case, 100% if every student got that right. But you can kind of see, okay, well, the final question only had a 10% success rate. 1 out of 10 people got the full marks. And you can then ask yourself, well, was that an issue with the question? Was it too difficult? Was it not taught well? What's underlying these success rates? So it's a nice metric to have against each question. so that you can see, are there any particular questions that were causing problems for the students. Now I'm going to go through and calculate the mark that each student got. So it will just be the sum going across all the questions. I can then copy that down, and then I might give the heading the same alignment, and we'll put that in bold. Now I can calculate the average of those marks. And we can see that for a test out of 22, the average mark was 9.4. You can lower the precision there if you're not too focused, or you can make it higher as well. I'll just leave it as a whole number. And then we can find the percentage, the average percentage, which would be the average mark divided by what it was out of, and then you just tell Excel, I want to see that as a percent, and I might change the alignment there as well. Oops. Okay, so on this hypothetical test, it's out of 22 marks, the average was 9, which is an average of 43. So on that data, you would think not the greatest, but again, I could perhaps provide a few more marks just to see, you know, what it could look like if things were a bit different. Okay, so on this updated marks, we've now got an average of 50%, which seems a bit better. Now for each individual student, we can work out their percentage. So we take their individual mark and we divide it by the total marks, and I'm going to press F4 to lock that reference so that when I copy it down, the denominator always stays as the total marks and it doesn't change as I change the formula. So that's the mark as a percentage. And the next thing we'll calculate is the rank. And the way we can do this, there is a function in Excel, it's called rank, and I just take the mark that the student got, and then I reference all of the marks, and I lock that reference, and then I want that rank to be descending. So that way the person who got the highest mark gets the lowest rank, and so on. And yeah, here we go. So top student who got full marks naturally came first. Then the third student came second, and so on and so on. We have two people who got an equal rank of 5th, which means there is no 6th, and then we jump straight to 7th. And that's just how Excel works. And now we want to convert that word, and I might just put a gap here just to demarcate. Now we want to say, okay, well, if that's the grade, what word would that grade be equivalent to? So here we need to use a function called XLOOKUP. Actually, there's a few ways you could do this, but Excel recently introduced a new function called XLOOKUP, and it's probably the simplest way to go about this. But before we can actually do the calculation, we need to work out or define the cutoff for each of these grades. So I'll just update this alignment. Let's get the border. Oops. We'll get a border in there. And because these will be defined, we'll give it the input format. So we may want to define an outstanding as anyone who got higher than 80%. High means above 65, sound 50, basic 35, and then limited means you got above 0, so anything that isn't the rest will just be limited. And now what I want to do is say the grade that any particular student got. I use the XLOOKUP function and I say go and find this percentage in this array of percentages, and I'll lock that reference, and then return one of these words, and I lock that too. If the mark's not found, I don't need to worry. And the match mode I'll put as -1. And so Excel will look for an exact match or the next larger item. And so when I press that, we see that the first student got outstanding. That shouldn't be a surprise if they got full marks. But when I copy that down, we can see that the grade is now automatically calculated based on the percentage they got. And you can always check 41 gets basic, and that makes sense because the student got above 35 but less than 50. So that falls into basic. 73 got a high, makes sense. And so that seems to be working well. So now what we'll do is we can just copy this logic. I'll just copy the logic and then we'll adapt it. Yes, they will fix once we fix these up. So now we're going to do the equivalent calculations for the individual sections. I might just create a gap there too. And first we need to say, well, what are the total marks only for section A? So here we've got our syllabus dot points. And again, you can define the syllabus however we like. It could, maybe they're alternating, it really doesn't matter. But we need a formula that will say, well, what are the marks just for the questions that related to syllabus part A? So we will say, I want the total if, and we say, add up these numbers, and we'll lock that reference, if the syllabus, and we'll lock that reference, is equal to this letter here. And I won't lock that one. So we say all of the A's are worth 10 marks. Oh, sorry, 10 marks. Let's double check. 10, yes. That's for part A, and part B, they're worth 12. Let's check that. There we go, 12. So for the 22 mark exam, 10 of them related to syllabus dot point A, 12 related to B. And now we can say, use a similar technique to say what were the marks for each individual student. So this should probably be shifted over there, and this should be there, so it lines up. And let's just call that, give that a width of 15. That's probably too much. Let's say 12. Yeah. So now I'm going to take this calculation and instead of adding up what it's out of, I want to add up what the student got and unlock the row reference so that when I drag this down, we get what we got R, but we need this locked. So that should stay as locked on the row. And then I can copy that down and we see the marks that the student got when it's only syllabus dot point A. Now this average should be there, and then the percentage automatically matches up. Now if I copy all of this here, that should automatically update, and these 2 marks should always add up to that, one would hope. Oh no, it doesn't. Oh yeah, 4 and 5, there we go, 4 and 4, yep. Okay, and now we can also work out the percentage. So I'll just take this calculation, but I want the percentage now to be out of the relevant section. I'll unlock the column so that if I take that and copy it here, the references should update as they need to. So, okay, now in terms of, I might just get these column widths all to be consistent. 12 is probably too much, maybe 10. And then let's do these 10. And that's probably it in terms of the basic structure of a marking grid. This part here is the essence of it. So making sure that for each individual question, we put room to say the grade, because that gives you the most flexibility to then do whatever calculations you need. Finally, actually, one thing I haven't done is I haven't done the calculation to count how many students got each grade. So let's just do that. So maybe I'll just get this format. So here we just want to count ifs, and we want to count how many times this grade was equal to whatever the grade was here. So here we see 3 people got outstanding. If I copy that down, 1 person got high. Oh, nobody got sound. 3 basic, 3 limited. Maybe I can bump up this person a bit to push them into sound territory. And so now we can see our spread updated. And maybe if I say that person didn't get anything there, they dropped a high. So 2 outstanding, 2 high, a sound, 2 basic, 3 limited. And you could even, if I just set this for now equal to this, visually it might be nice to create a conditional formatting with data bars that then shows how that looks. And I might just edit the formatting. So we'll show the bar only, maybe a grey is all we need. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, there we go. And then as your data changes, you know, if you know, more people actually got full marks, we can see the distribution of how everything is. So maybe we want to, maybe we want to see a normal distribution there perhaps, or maybe not. It depends on what you're expecting, but it's a nice quick visual to see what are the spread of my grades. And maybe at this point, it might be worth me showing an example. I've sanitized an actual example of what this looks like for a math exam. Naturally, the list of students is longer. This was across 2 classes. I've added an input where you can say what class the student's from, so that if you wanted to only look at a particular class, you can. But the cutoffs are still there. Here with math, we have the exam in 2 sections, so it's helpful to see how did students go in section 1 versus 2. But then we also had 4 different sections of the syllabus that I've just called W, X, Y, Z, but otherwise pretty much the same setup. For the input section, once the inputs are made, you'll notice there's this kind of traffic light coloring system that just gets created using conditional formatting. But the benefit of that is you can quickly see, are there particular questions that have been done poorly or not? And so it's a visual formatting that re-emphasizes the success rate that we calculate. So for example, this final question on this test wasn't done very well at all. Just a handful of students got all the marks. Most people got nothing. Some people got partial marks. And so you can zoom out and get a bit of a visual feel for how this test went overall. Another thing I've added that helps with that, and again, this isn't something you have to do, but I find it helpful to see maybe I'll just make a bit more space, to see the distribution of the class or the students that we've measured. They are represented by these columns here. And then this yellow line represents what you would expect to see if the results were normally distributed around a defined target mean. So here I've said, well, what if the average we were hoping for was 50%? How would the distribution look if it was normally distributed around that 50%, like a bell curve? And here we see that, well, this cohort has done quite well. They're ahead of that curve. But what if actually we didn't want a mean of 50, we wanted a mean of, say, 65? Then it's a bit of a different story. Actually, if we were going for a mean of 65, a lot of the students that are down here actually need to shift up to fill out this gap here. And there are a few students ahead of the curve still, but it's a different picture to if we were targeting a lower mean. So I find that helpful to get a quick snapshot for my classes if I'm doing a diagnostic or a formal assessment. it's a very nice visual to quickly see how has the cohort gone overall. So that's again extra that isn't necessary, but maybe some more ideas for what could be helpful. But again, I should emphasize the key to getting this right is to get your data at this level of granularity, at the per question level of detail, because that will allow you to do all the calculations you might want to do. So that's what it could look like for a test with numerical grades. As I mentioned earlier, I'll also show how I might adapt this if we weren't doing numerical grades, and I should at this point add the caveat that this is just my idea. I haven't actually ever had to create a marking grid for a non-numerical assessment. But if I did have to, this is probably what I'd do. But again, you can adapt this how you like. Again, I'll just start, we're going to need the names of the students. And again, I'll just do student 1 to 10. Now, we're not going to have a mark or a percentage mark anymore, but what we will have, we will still need some kind of score to convert into a grade, but instead of an input structure that's based around questions and marks of questions, I presume we're going to have dot points and that relate to various elements of a rubric. So you have a rubric with certain things that you want, I presume, and we could weight those dot points. They could all be equally weighted if you want, but maybe not. I'm just going to go with the generic X, Y, Z, and this is where we create our input. So here I'll give it a border, and we'll give the fill the light yellow, and I might just turn off the grid lines, and that can all be center aligned. Okay, so let's say we're going with an XYZ set of dot points in a rubric, and let's say they're weighted 20%, 30%, well, actually I might format these as percentages first. So let's say we have 20%, 30% and 50% weighting, and again that can be anything. It could just be equal if you haven't really done any weighting. And at this point, I'm going to assume that you're going to grade each student a letter A, B, C, D, E. And again, you can define this however you like, but I'm going to say each student will get a grade against each dot point, and I'm going to assign a value to that grade. So for each grade, we're going to have a value. These will be defined, so A, B, C, D, E. Let's go A, B, C, A, B, C, D, E. And let's just say A is worth 5, B is worth 4, C is worth 3, D is worth 2, E is worth 1. Again, you can define these however you like, which is why I'm putting them in yellow. So let's just say student 1 gets all A's, student 2 gets all B's, student 3 gets all C's, student 4 gets all D's, and student 5 gets all E's, just so that we can see somebody landing within each grade. And then we'll just have some random mix from there. We need to set up our calculations so that they work no matter what combination we get. But here's just a dummy set of data. Now again, we're going to have ultimately our outstanding, high, sound, basic, and limited grades. And again, these words can be whatever you like. I'm just going with what I'm used to seeing in the math faculty. And we, again, need to define a cutoff, just like we did before. And we'll probably want to keep a count of how many students are falling into each grade range. But here, I might just take that formatting. Maybe we'll go one level of precision. We might want to say anybody who gets grades that result in an average value of 4.5 should get outstanding. Anything above 3.5, high. Anything above 2.5, sound. Anything above 1.5, basic. And then anything above 0, limited. And this will make more sense once I start filling out everything else. But the idea is to be able to work out our grade, we need to convert these letters into effectively a score. And the way we can calculate that score, I'll just copy this over here, and this will be a calculation, so I won't fill it in, and it will be actually a number, so it should really get that format and then no fill. And the logic, we can use two functions in Excel, my favorite two functions actually, combined, index and match. So I say I want to return one of these scores, and the score I want to return is based on the match of the letter that was assigned, the letter grade, matching out of these grades. And I have to enter 0 for an exact match. I'm looking for that letter exactly. And if I've locked everything properly, then as I copy that across and down, the calculation should automatically say, for example, if I focus here, an A is worth 5, an A is worth 5, a B is worth 4. Here, a C is worth 3, D is worth 2, D is worth 2. And so that's automatically converting these letter grades into a score that will allow us to essentially convert this combination of grades into a single word. And so what we'll need to do first is we will find the combined score for each student. And again, because we've defined weightings, we can say what is this score worth given each of the weightings, and the function we can use is sum product. So I take that set of scores, I'll take these weights and I'll lock that, and that will get multiplied by these scores. So it will be 20% times 5 plus 30% times 5 plus 50% times 5. Now in this case, it's just going to be 5. But as we copy that down, we can see that we get different combinations. So 20% 5, 30% 5, 50% 4 gets an average score of 4.5. And I might just increase the precision there so it's all consistent. And now, just like we did with our numerical results, we can use the XLOOKUP function to say, well, what does this score map to in terms of these words? So I'll just give this order. Might give that an alignment of 1. And we'll say XLOOKUP. I want to look up this value in these cutoffs. And I then want to return these matching words. Don't worry if nothing's found, and the match mode should be -1. And so, unsurprisingly, the person who got all A's gets outstanding, the person who got all B's gets high, all C's get sound, all D's got basic, and all E's got limited. And then we've got our mix. So sitting at 2.9 is between 2.5 and 3.5, so they've got sound. Getting 4.5 or higher gets you outstanding. 3.5 or higher high, 2.5 or higher sound, and then a basic there, which makes sense. Again, we can calculate our counts. I might just copy this to get the formatting. And then we want it to refer to these words. and then everything should update. So there again, we get a distribution of our various grades, so that you can get a glimpse of how the cohort has gone. And that's kind of how I would go about structuring the marking grid if it was based on letter grades instead of based on number, like marks, questions being out of a certain mark and what marks did students get. Whether that's going to work for you in your faculty, I genuinely don't know. But hopefully, even if it doesn't perfectly work, it at least gives you some ideas of how you could go about converting grade, like letter grades into an ultimate single grade for an assessment. So that's pretty much all I have to go through. Again, I believe I'll be giving an in-person demonstration of these ideas, and then this video is really just a follow-up so that if you did want to take any of these ideas on board, you've got something that you can look at, pause, watch as slowly or as quickly as you like. But as I mentioned before, if there's any aspects of the Excel, any of these functions or formulas that you're not familiar with, that you would like help with, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll be happy to help. And because of my teaching background in terms of teaching Excel for many, many years, I've got heaps of resources that I could send your way so that you could learn all of this stuff if you think it could be useful to you. All right, thanks for watching.